Hi everyone, welcome to our first class. We're going to be starting in about a few minutes just to wait for everyone to come in. All right guys, so just to address a few questions that I'm seeing in the Q&A, yes, this class does help with Scioli, and for everything relating to COVID, that's going to be in the last class. So everything we're going to be doing in the classes 1, 2, and 3 are going to be just on diseases in general, and then the last class we're going to be talking about COVID. As for why everyone is muted, it's because this is a Zoom webinar, not a meeting. So there's some like different features, but you can still ask questions in the Q&A. If you're gonna ask questions, it's better to ask it through the Q&A and not the chat because it's more difficult for me to see the chat to answer your questions. So a webinar, someone's asking what's a webinar. So it's kind of like more of a, it's like a class where it's like not as, I guess, interactive as a meeting where you can see everyone. So that's why everyone is muted and that's why no one's video is on. So yeah. But if you have any questions at all, just feel free to ask me in the Q&A, okay? And then I'll just answer it. And if you want to change your name, I'm not sure you can, but yeah. Okay, so we're probably gonna wait for like 1 more minute and then we'll start the real class. So someone's asking me how much background knowledge you need to know. You don't really need any, honestly. We're starting from the very basics. So to look at the participants section, you just go down to the bottom of your menu and there should be like mute, stop video, and then Q&A. So just click on participants and then everyone should show up. And also, if you're attending Kid Teach Kid from our last 6-week math camp, then welcome back. And if you're new here, welcome, because it's gonna be a fun class. So I don't think you're able to see like your own video or be unmuted because this is a webinar. So yeah, what this class is about, it's about public health. So basically health in populations and how diseases spread. So yeah. All right, so it's 4:05. We're gonna start now. If you'll have any questions again, feel free to just ask me in the Q&A and then I'll do my best to answer them. All right, so in this class, we're gonna be covering public health, which is what the class name is. And we're all living in COVID-19, so I feel like usually we don't really learn about public health in school because it's not like a huge topic, but since we're all as in part of a pandemic, I felt like it would be important to learn about public health and help prepare for Scioli, which is an event that some of you guys may know about. So in our first class, we're going to be discussing a background on infectious diseases. So yeah, so let's just get started. So first, before we begin, I just wanted to talk to you about something. So I recently wrote this book called Epidemiology Unmasked, and it's 116 pages, and it's basically we're going to be covering the information in this book. So it would really help if you guys got this book to go along with this class. It's optional, but it's highly recommended. And yeah, let me send you guys a link in the chat to get the book if you want to. That's the chat. If you want me to send it again, just let me know. And also, I would recommend, you can get it in two forms. You can get it in an ebook form. Oh, hi, Grace. Okay, you can get it in an ebook form, and you can also get it in paperback form. I would recommend ebook for this class because paperback will take like forever to ship. So yeah, an ebook is not as expensive. It's not on Audible yet, but I'm trying to get it soon. Hi, Bella. Okay. Anyway, yeah. And also another thing to mention is for Kid Teach Kid, we're doing something new this year to like encourage like participation. So we have a point system. Rich is going to send out an email about it all over, like in a few minutes or an hour maybe. And basically what we do is if you engage with our classes, well, you get points, and then after you get points, you can attend like our special sessions. So we haven't like figured out all the details yet, but if you get this book, you get 80 points, which is a lot, which is the most amount of points you can get for a single task. And also all the proceeds that I earn from this book will be donated to help COVID-19. So don't worry about like me being greedy or anything like that, okay? All right, so that's enough with the self-plugging. We can move on to the actual contents of the real class, okay? So let me just talk to you about what we're actually going to be covering in this class. So week 1, which is today, we're going to be talking about the background information. So basically this course follows like you being an epidemiologist and following an entire outbreak investigation. So what that means is first you identify that there's a lot of diseases in a population, and then you follow it and track it over time, and then you try to solve the outbreak. So that's what's going to happen in our entire course. But of course, before we begin, we have to know some background information on like how diseases spread, how they can become an outbreak, and things like that. So that's what we're going to be talking about today. And then in week 2, we're going to be collecting epidemiological data. What that means is we're going to be like gathering all the case counts and finding cases of disease and actually figuring out if an outbreak occurs. And then in week 3, we're going to be analyzing all the data that we got from week 2, and we're going to be finding the source of the outbreak and trying to tackle it, basically. That's week 3. And then week 4, we're just going to be finishing up the outbreak with like the prevention and everything and treatment. And then we're also going to be discussing COVID-19 and also how you can create your own COVID-19 initiative. Yeah, hopefully that will be pretty fun. Okay, let me see if there are any questions right now. Okay, not really. It says hype on week 4 because I'm really hyped to be talking about it, basically. All right, so let's move on. Oh, also one more thing. Materials recommended is the book that I got that I wrote, and also a calculator, because you don't really need it today, but for the 2nd and the 3rd week, you may need a calculator. Okay, so that's that. So first, what is public health? It's probably not what you think it is, basically. Well, public health is not the traditional healthcare, as in like, oh, you go to the doctor and you get treated. It's more about like, it's more mathy, basically. It's more focused on math and how epidemiologists can look at diseases and how they spread in populations. So basically, the primary focus would be on populations instead of individuals. So let's say like Joe gets the flu, and then he wants to go to the doctor and get treated. That would not be considered public health. Instead, that would be considered clinical medicine, because that's targeted on one person, Joe. But if a lot of people start getting the flu and then a lot of people need to get treated, then that's when public health would come into play. All right, so then emphasis, public health would be on the prevention and health promotion in the whole community. So health promotion is basically trying to improve the health of a population, whether that be by allowing people to live longer or allowing people to have better access to healthcare. So that's the emphasis for public health. But on the other hand, for clinical medicine, it would be on diagnosing a patient's illness or treatment and focusing on the entire patient instead of the entire community. So yeah. And also, I think I mentioned this earlier, but if you're in Sayoli and you're interested in doing disease detectives, this would be a great course for that event. And also my book too, it's basically written just to like help a basic overview for the event. All right, let me check if there are any questions over now. The class is gonna be 1 hour. Okay, so the paradigm, so basically public health is gonna be aimed toward the environment and how people interact with each other and less on individual people themselves and getting medical care for individual people. Oh, not 2 hours. So basically the second hour of the class is going to be biology, which is a completely different class. All right, anyway, there are 2 different types of epidemiology that you need to focus on. The first one is called descriptive epidemiology, which is what we're going to be covering next week. And then the second type is called analytical epidemiology, which is what we're going to be covering in the 3rd class. So yeah. All right, so that's hopefully you have the gist of what public health is now. Basically, what you need to focus on is that its emphasis is not on a person, but rather on a population and diseases in a population. All right. So for epidemiology, that's like the science behind public health. So the core science for public health is epidemiology. And if you're going to be technical, to define epidemiology, it's basically studying, like in simple terms, it would just be how diseases spread in populations. In our class, we're going to be focusing on infectious diseases. Infectious diseases are basically diseases that can be spread from one person to another, but epidemiology has various branches. There's different chronic disease epidemiology, there's infectious disease epidemiology, there's a lot. So, but in our class, we're focusing on infectious disease epidemiology. Also, if the chat is going to get too rowdy, I can disable it. So please don't try to be too rowdy. Yeah. All right. So the study of determinants and distribution of disease. So determinants of disease is basically what causes disease. For example, a bacteria or a virus, or perhaps you have too much sunlight and then you get like sunlight can also be a determinant. It can also be like contaminated water, etc. So a determinant is basically what causes the disease. And distribution would be like the patterns of disease in populations. For example, let's say in Texas, we have in Katy area, there's a lot of cases of a disease. Meanwhile, in like, I don't know, Fort Worth, there's like 0 cases. That's basically the distribution of diseases. And the application of the study to control health problems. The main goal of epidemiology would be to help save people. So that is that part. Okay, let me see if there's other classes. Yes, I will be sharing the slides. Actually, I think Rich already uploaded the slides to the Kid Teach Kid website, so you can find them there if you want. All right, next slide. So there are 4 different classifications of diseases, but the 2 main ones are going to be communicable and non-communicable. And communicable basically means that it can be transmitted from one person to another. So for example, cholera. Cholera is a waterborne disease that's caused by the bacteria called Vibrio cholerae. And cholera actually has a very long history. So when in 1854, there was the epidemiologist named John Snow. So John Snow was the first epidemiologist, basically. He was the father of epidemiology. And back in his time, basically everyone believed in a theory called the miasma theory. That theory was if you got a disease, it was because you were sinning, and that was God's like punishment for you. Yes, Grace, the recordings will be posted on the website. All right, so and anyway, he realized that that's probably not the real reason why people get diseases. It's probably because it's also bad air, but also because a common way of thinking was that it was because they were sinning. Anyway, he decided that he wanted to conduct an outbreak investigation since a lot of people in the same area were getting the cholera disease. So what he did was he had he decided to conduct an analytical study where he gathered people with cholera and people without cholera, and then, or people who were exposed to a certain like thing that he felt like was probably causing disease, and people who are not exposing to it. And he did like some statistical analysis, and then he found out that, oh, it's actually the water pumps that are causing cholera, not the not like bad air or like sinning or anything like that. So that's why John Snow is often termed as the father of epidemiology. So John Snow is a very important person that you need to know. So cholera, and then there's Zika virus. Zika virus is also communicable. It's caused in like pregnancies, and then it can cause a variety of like bad manifestations in babies. For example, microencephalopath. I can't remember how to pronounce it, but it's basically when the baby has a really small head. Okay, let me check if there's any other questions. Yes, chickenpox is communicable since it's caused by the varicella zoster virus. Lyme disease is caused by ticks, but it is communicable because it is an infectious disease. It's caused by Borrelia burgdorferi. That's a bacteria. So, and then there's influenza, of course, there's the flu, there's the COVID-19, and there's also strep throat, which is caused by a bacteria called Streptococcus pyogenes. If you want to know more about like the technical disease causing things, then I suggest you go on, I suggest you buy invest in a microbiology textbook. That's probably where I learned most of my stuff too. All right, and then on the other hand, we have non-communicable diseases, which are diseases that are not transmitted from a person to a person. So for example, we have, well, a lot of them are going to be diseases of lifestyle. So for example, diabetes is an example of a disease of lifestyle, or heart attack, or atherosclerosis, which is, okay, I feel like the chat is getting too rowdy, so I'm just going to like pause it real quick so that people can pay attention. Okay. All right. Anyway, kidney failure. That's when your kidneys stop working, basically. But a really cool thing about kidney failure is that if one of your kidneys like stops working, then your other kidney can like completely take over the function of your entire body, which is, I think, is really cool. And then leukemia is basically cancer of the white blood cells. These are none of these can be transmitted from person to person. They're either caused by genetics, for example, what's it called? The muscular dystrophy. For example, that's a genetic disease that's non-communicable. And yeah, but in our class, we're going to be covering communicable diseases because we're going through an outbreak investigation. All right. Oh, someone asked me what's atherosclerosis. So basically, atherosclerosis is when your arteries start thickening and hardening. So then it's more difficult for blood to pass through. And that can lead to a variety of manifestations. For example, you can get like heart attack or something like that. Yeah. All right, so next we have infectious diseases. All right, so since we hopefully calmed down a bit, I'm gonna open the chat again, but please don't spam. All right, now it's open, but yeah. So we're gonna go over each of the 6 different types of pathogens for infectious diseases, and these are basically the ones that we're going to be covering in this class. So first we have bacteria. Well, bacteria, I'm sure you guys have all heard about bacteria, basically. Bacteria are single-celled, prokaryotic, microscopic organisms, meaning that they don't have a nucleus. So, and their genetic material is basically floating around in the cell in like there's no nucleus, basically. And then, but actually, I'm not sure if you guys know this, but some of you guys may know this, but most of the bacteria in your body or in the world are actually beneficial. So for example, you have a lot of bacteria in your gut to help with digestion. And for example, in the gut of cows, there's a lot of bacteria called methanogens to help create methane for the cow. So those are all very helpful bacteria. There's actually some bacteria that can help feed on oil to help prevent oil spills. So yeah, that's bacteria. But then in our class, we're going to be covering harmful bacteria such as salmonella. So salmonella is I believe it's the 2nd most common foodborne illness causing bacteria. It causes a variety of symptoms. For example, you can get diarrhea, vomiting, nausea, abdominal pain, all that stuff. You don't want salmonella. So we're going to be covering a lot about foodborne illnesses in this class. And of course, E. coli is another type of bacteria. E. coli is one of those bacteria where there's a lot of helpful strains. For example, you have a lot of E. coli in your gut, but then there's also a lot of harmful strains like E. coli 0157H7. That's a strain that's really harmful and can cause bloody diarrhea. So yeah. And then viruses are a lot smaller than bacteria. Viruses are definitely microscopic. They're non-living actually, but scientists are commonly debating about whether viruses are actually non-living or living, but the general consensus is that they're non-living because they cannot survive on their own. So viruses are only made of a protein coat, and then inside there's the genetic material, either DNA or RNA. And viruses infect cells by injecting their genetic material in there and forcing the cell to basically do transcription and translation to create other copies of the viruses so that they can lyse out of the cell and infect more cells. But basically, viruses can cause some of the most terrible diseases. For example, SARS-CoV-2 and COVID-19 is pretty big nowadays. There is stuff like varicella zoster virus that causes chickenpox. There's measles. Oh my God, guys, measles is probably the most infectious disease there is. And yeah, I'm gonna disable the chat right now because it's getting a little bit too rowdy. Anyway, viruses, measles. I'm not gonna go on my whole rant on anti-vaxxers and why they suck, but basically measles is one of the most transmissible diseases. One person on average can infect 15 other people. So measles is a big deal. And then there's the flu caused by the influenza virus. And then there's the common cold caused by the rhinovirus, although there's many different strains of the common cold and the flu. All right, so fungi. Fungi, it's not as common of a pathogen, but it can cause a variety of diseases. Ringworm, I know it sounds like something that a parasitic worm may cause, but it's actually a fungal disease. Basically, what happens when you get ringworm is you have a bunch of red circles on your skin. Yeah. Exactly, measles are really dangerous now because a bunch of people are not getting vaccinated. All right, and then there's also athlete's foot. Basically, it's caused by Tinea pedis, which is a type of fungus, and it infects foots. So yeah, protists are actually a very large category. A lot of the protist diseases that we're going to be talking about are unicellular. For example, the protist that caused malaria is called Plasmodium falciparum. That is unicellular and it's has a huge complicated life cycle. And then giardiasis is actually the most common waterborne disease. It's caused by a pathogen called Giardia lamblia. And as you start learning more about infectious diseases, you'll start to realize that a lot of the times the names of the pathogen will actually correlate to the disease name. For example, Giardia lamblia, the disease will be giardiasis. Salmonella, the disease will be salmonellosis, and things like that. Can tapeworm kill you? I'm sure it can. I'm sure any disease can kill somebody. If you're super immunocompromised, then it's very likely that you may get killed just by maybe the flu or something. So I'm sure it can. All right. I'm going to be muting the chat for maybe 2 more minutes or so, and then I might open it again depending on how I'm feeling. All right. Parasitic worms. They basically feed on your intestines. Some of them migrate into your bloodstream, and some of them end up migrating up to your brain. There's a very, very virulent parasitic worm called Trichinella spiralis. I think that was it. It's in pork, and then once you eat it, it migrates to your brain, and then a lot of people die from that. Okay, let me check the Q&A. All right, so then we have tapeworm. Tapeworm, you guys have probably all heard of tapeworm. Basically, it's not good, okay. And then pinworm is caused by touching infected soil, and then, yeah. All right, prions. Okay, prions is something that you guys actually may not have heard about. I remember when I was first learning about these, I don't think I knew what prions were. So basically, unlike the other ones that we were talking about, prions are actually not non-living at all. I know viruses aren't, but prions, they are just weirdly folded proteins. So I'm sure you guys all know that we have a lot of proteins in our bodies and they can fold in very different ways, but prions, yeah, prions are proteins, but prions, they fold, they're in this intermediate state between unfolded and folded. And that's the reason why they can like actually cause other healthy proteins in your brain to unfold and then create a very, very, very deadly neurodegenerative diseases. So in here we have mad cow disease. Mad cow disease can't infect humans, but lately there's been a strain of mad cow disease called Creutzfeldt-Jakob disease that actually has changed into able to infect humans. Don't worry too much about all of the diseases that I'm talking about. I'm just giving you guys a quick overview. All right, so I'm gonna open the chat now. Please don't spam, okay? If you spam, I'm gonna close it again. All right, so next page, we have the epidemiological triad. So before that was everything I talked before this point was something called etiology. Etiology is the study of the cause of disease. And now we're actually going to transition to epidemiology. So first concept we're going to be talking about is the epidemiological triad. Every single infectious disease can be characterized by the epidemiological triad. As you can see here, I have a nice little picture of the epidemiological triad. The agent. The agent is the microorganism that actually causes the disease. So for example, if we're going to talk about the flu, okay? If we're going to talk about the flu, then the agent will be the influenza virus. And then next we have the host. The host is the organism that actually gets the disease. So for example, if Joe has not gotten the influenza this year yet, then he is a possible host. He is a susceptible host, meaning that it is possible for him to get the disease, okay? And then the environment would be the external factors for the agent to proliferate. So basically it would be the natural habitat of the agent. So in this case, if we have influenza, then the environment of the influenza would be the mucous membranes of a human. That's where the influenza virus proliferates and spreads and infects cells, etc. So that is the agent host environment triad. So that was an example for influenza. If we wanted to talk about, let's talk about COVID-19 since it's pretty hot topic. So the agent for COVID-19 is going to be the SARS-CoV-2 virus. That's the thing that actually causes the disease. The host is going to be uninfected humans. That's, remember, uninfected humans are susceptible to the disease if they can get it. So that's just another vocab word that you guys should probably know, susceptible, meaning that, I'll just write it in the chat real quick. Please don't spam right now so you guys can actually see how to spell the word susceptible. There. All right, so that's basically, like if someone can get the disease, then that means they're susceptible. Okay. So anyway, the host of COVID-19 would be a person who has not previously gotten the disease. That meaning that they're susceptible to the disease, meaning that they can get it. Okay. So the environment of COVID-19 would be, again, the mucous membranes, the lungs of a human, because that's where the COVID-19 virus proliferates. All right. So if you guys have any questions about the agent host environment triad, just let me know, write it in the chat, and then I'll do my best to answer your questions. All right, cool. If no questions, we'll move on. Here we have the natural history and spectrum of disease. Actually, before we continue this, I just wanted to give like a quick little announcement. So all of the topics that I'm covering in this class they're covered in very much detail in my book. So if you want to get my book, let me just send you a chat let me just send you the link real quick. If any of you guys forgot, but that's basically the place where you can get my book. And I would recommend the ebook version where you can just like download it and then you can look at it again. Yeah. Oh, someone asked if someone gets COVID-19 and is recovered, can he later get it back? The short answer is no, but that's only if COVID-19 does not mutate. If COVID-19 mutates into like some weird like strain and then basically becomes a new like type of, has different genetic material, then the person can get COVID-19 again. But the short answer would be no if it does not mutate. Because the thing is, once you get the disease, your body builds immunity against it. So that means you don't get it again. All right. Okay, so let's go over the natural history and spectrum of disease. So to define the natural history and spectrum of disease, it's basically the course of a disease in a person or an organism, the host, from before they got to the disease all the way to the end, where they either recover or die or etc., you know. And all this is without treatment. This is basically the natural history and spectrum of disease. So we'll go over each one of these little stages and things. Okay, stop spamming, guys. Do not spam, otherwise I will mute it again. Okay, let me check if there are any questions right now. No. Okay, someone asked me, will COVID-19 mutate? There is a possibility, but I'm not completely sure. There is a possibility, so yeah. No one knows yet. Okay. All right, so now we have, let's start from the very beginning of this chart. We have the stage of susceptibility. Remember the term I sent in the chat was susceptible. And basically what that means is you can't get the disease. So in the stage of susceptibility, the host can get the disease, okay? That's just before like how you and I are doing. Like we have not gotten the disease. We haven't, okay, let me give a good example for this. Okay, let's just go back to Joe. So let's say Joe is just going about his day. He hasn't gotten vaccinated for the seasonal influenza virus strain yet. So he is in the stage of susceptibility. Yes, I'm sorry, I keep using Joe. I don't know, all right, anyway. So he's in the stage of susceptibility because he hasn't gotten any prevention measures or anything. Okay, fine, we'll use Bob. Okay, Bob. All right, so then, now Bob got he is exposed to the influenza virus now. That marks the exposure. He can get it either through, most likely way he'll get it will be through like someone else like transmitting it to him. For example, if someone sneezed in his face, then that's a possible way that he could have gotten it. So that marks the exposure, and the exposure marks the transition to the stage of subclinical disease. So this is an important concept to know. Every single disease, well, basically every single disease, there is a stage of subclinical disease. What that means is there's no symptoms yet. The body is undergoing some changes and the pathogen is just infecting it. So once the pathogen has infected the person's body, then there's a period of time where the body needs to start like, realizing, oh shoot, this is a bad thing. Like we need to start having immune responses against it. So that is when there are no symptoms yet, okay? That's when we have, that's when you have the stage of subclinical disease. Okay, you know what? Someone is telling me to mute the chat. So yeah, I'll mute it. Because if you guys think it's distracting, I'm definitely gonna mute it. Okay, anyway, so yeah, for example, if for influenza, Joe, I'm not exactly sure what the stage of subclinical disease, like the timing for that is for influenza, but I know for COVID-19, it can be like 2 to 3 days, 5 days, up to like 2 weeks almost. So that's basically when you show no symptoms, but you have already gotten infected. So in the middle of the stage of subclinical disease, there is the pathological changes. So pathological changes is when the host's body begins to like change in immune response. For example, there may be a buildup of like antibodies, or there may be like activation of the complement system, immune system, etc. But there's not any visible symptoms yet, okay? And then just to let you guys know, the stage of subclinical disease, where you show no symptoms, there's a name for that. Actually, it's called the incubation period. I'll type it in the chat real quick. My computer is frozen. Incubation period. Let me see if I can, hold on. Okay, yeah, I don't think I can chat either, but basically incubation period is INCUBATION, incubation period. That's when you have no symptoms. And Yeah, that's important to know because the incubation period is often used by doctors to diagnose diseases. So for example, if there are two diseases of very common symptoms, the doctor can use the incubation period to see, oh, this incubation matches with disease A, this incubation period matches with disease B. So even though they show very similar symptoms, they can use the incubation period to figure out which disease it actually is. So that's the incubation period. All right, and then we have the onset of symptoms. So let's say for influenza, that would just be Bob will start coughing a lot. He'll maybe probably get a fever, and then he might get muscle aches, etc. That's when the onset of symptoms occur, and that marks the transition to the stage of clinical disease. And clinical disease is when there is the main part of the disease like process. So this will be when Bob is actually sick. So he might like stay at home all day and like be very bedridden. So this will be during the stage of clinical disease. And right after symptoms start, he'll probably go to the doctor and receive a diagnosis, which is why we have the usual time of diagnosis right after the onset of symptoms. All right. So after the stage of clinical disease, we have the stage of recovery, disability, or death. And it sounds depressing, but sometimes people like their immune systems are not strong enough to fight the disease, so they die or they are disabled, basically. That's kind of sad, but we also have the stage of recovery, which is when most of the times, like if Bob got influenza, he'll probably be able to recover, and that will just lead to the end of the natural history and spectrum of disease. So yeah, just another fun fact, during the stage of subclinical disease, for infectious diseases, it's called the incubation period. But for long-term diseases, for example, kidney failure or atherosclerosis or weird chronic diseases, then it's called the latency period. Latency, yeah, latency period. All right, someone asked me, what's the R0 of flu compared to COVID? R0 of flu is a lot less than COVID. If I remember correctly, the R0 of flu is around like 1.2, 1.3-ish, which is not a lot. And COVID, the very beginning stages of COVID, I remember it was like a 5.7. We're gonna go all over R0 and stuff next week, but now it's gotten like better, I think. Now it's around like 3-ish, so yeah, that's that. Okay, next we have, oh, by the way, if anyone has any questions about anything that I just said, please ask it in the chat. I will be happy to answer all of your questions. Or not the chat, sorry, I meant the Q&A. Can we get COVID-19 by breathing? Technically, yes, but that's only, but since COVID-19 is spread through droplet spread, we're gonna go over that just in like a second. So you know what, I'll just talk about that in a second. All right, I'm gonna enable the chat because I know y'all like to talk to each other, but please don't spam, okay? All right, we're gonna move on to the next thing called disease transmission, which is exactly what I was about to talk about. So there are two main types of disease transmission that you need to know about. One of them is direct transmission and the other is indirect transmission, okay? So yeah, let's just get to it. So direct transmission, there's two main types of direct transmission. So direct contact, basically it's caused by like the host, like the person who's sick, directly coming into contact with the person who's not sick. So for example, if Joe has influenza and Bob does not, then if like Joe sneezes or like Joe, like if Bob accidentally like ingests Joe's bodily fluid, okay, that sounds disgusting, but my bad. But like basically if you have come in contact with the person with the disease, for example, touching or kissing or like doing other like things that get in contact with each other, I'm sure you guys understand what I mean. Then that's an example of direct contact. So for example, Ebola is transmitted by the infected person transmitting the disease to an uninfected person by the uninfected person coming into contact with the infected person's bodily fluids. So that is basically direct contact. Mononucleosis is basically caused by kissing. That's why it's called the kissing disease. And hookworm is caused by directly touching the hookworm that's in the soil. So that is direct contact. So here I have a picture of people shaking hands. That would be an example of direct contact. And the next type of direct transmission is called droplet spread. So I was talking about this earlier with COVID-19. So this is different from another type of spread we're going to be talking about. You may have recently in the news, you may be hearing about, COVID-19 being airborne and all that, but droplet spread and airborne are two completely different things. So droplet spread is when an infected person sneezes or coughs on an uninfected person, or maybe talking can even transmit like the particles of the droplets to an uninfected person. All right, anyway, so for example, if Joe has influenza and Bob does not, okay? Sorry, I keep using Joe and Bob, they're just easy names. All right, so Joe may sneeze on Bob within a short range, within 1 meter. That is the range for droplet spread. If it's more than 1 meter, it's not droplet spread. But if it's within 1 meter, then it's droplet spread, and that's why it's called direct transmission, because it's over a short distance. So as I said here, it is going to be short range, large aerosols. So so it's going to be like liquid particles basically that have the virus suspended in them. So back to someone who asked me if COVID-19 can be spread by breathing. It can if you're breathing in within 1 meter of a person who has COVID-19 basically, and they just sneezed or coughed or whatever. But if it's over like 6 feet or by social distancing, there's a less chance of getting infected. So that's why social distancing is very important. And that's why using masks are also important, because with droplet spread, masks can help contain the spread of the pathogen basically. All right. So if anyone has any questions about direct transmission, please let me know. Wouldn't COVID-19 also be a direct contact? Yes, but the main way for spreading would be droplet spread. Of course, if someone like ingests someone with their bodily fluids, they can also get it. But since it's like more often spread through coughing or sneezing, etc., then that is why we classify COVID-19 as droplet spread. Okay. Next, we're going to move on. Let me see. Does anyone else have any other questions? Can COVID-19 be spread from rain and water? Okay, since I'm not like okay, you know what? I'm just going to answer the questions one at a time. Can COVID-19 be spread from rain and water? I don't think so, but take that with a grain of salt. It's mostly going to be droplet spread. So does mask 100% block the spread? No, because the thing is, COVID-19, it's spread by viruses. Viruses are tiny. So, but it can substantially block the spread. So yeah, that's why we need to take masks, but it will not 100% block it. Okay, next we have more disease transmission. Now we're moving on to indirect transmission. Unlike direct transmission, we have indirect transmission, which is not directly like involving two people or two organisms coming close together to spread the disease. We have 3 examples of indirect transmission. Yes, tuberculosis is a virus. Oh no, sorry, no. Tuberculosis is a bacteria. It's caused by Mycobacterium tuberculosis. That's the bacteria name. Okay. Indirect transmission. We have the first type is vector-borne. For example, Lyme disease. Lyme disease is caused by a tick, and basically what this means is instead of from one organism directly transmitting it to this next organism, there's an intermediate animate, like real living organism that carries the disease. So for example, Lyme disease, it's carried by a tick. Rocky Mountain spotted fever is also carried by a tick. There's also malaria carried by mosquitoes. Dengue fever carried by Aedes mosquitoes, etc. So those are indirect transmission caused by vector-borne. And there's 2 different types of vectors, mechanical versus biological. And a mechanical vector is one in which the infectious disease, like the pathogen, does not like interact with the vector. And by the way, the animate organism is called a vector. So for example, if we have, let me think of a good example. Black plague. Let's say we have the plague, Black Death, sorry, my bad. So let's say we have the plague, right? So it's caused by, wait, no, that's not a good example. Okay, let's just say this. So we have cows in a field, and then they are stepping like, wait, no, that's not a good example either. Let me think of a good example of this. I will think of one, don't worry. Okay, I got it. So let's say we have a fly, and then it it steps on fecal matter, and then it flies over to the food that someone is trying to eat, and then it like steps on it basically, and then the fecal matter goes into the food. That would be, the fly in this case would be an example of a mechanical vector because it does not directly interact with the food basically. Like there's no like physiological like things going on. It's just carrying it over. That's why it's mechanical. Biological, on the other hand, would be when they do have physical interactions. So for example, if we're going to talk about malaria, then malaria would be an example. There's the mosquitoes called the, like, what kind of mosquito? It was like the Anopheles mosquito, I remember. So Anopheles mosquito, that is the vector for malaria, and basically what it does is the malaria has like physiological interactions. Malaria, it changes inside the body of the Anopheles mosquito, and then the Anopheles mosquito bites someone and then transmits the malaria. So that's why it would be a biological vector. So hopefully you guys understand the difference between, let me check if there are any questions. Could you disable the chat? Yeah, guys, please stop spamming so much in the chat. It's like, I'll just disable it again. You know what? If like no one, yeah, I'll just disable it again. So anyway, we have vehicle-borne, which is the next. So instead of having the disease transmit through a vector, which is something that's animate and living, in vehicle-borne diseases, it is transmitted through a non-living substance. So for example, it can be transmitted through food, water, or something called a fomite. A fomite is a fomite is an object that can be contaminated and then able to transmit the disease. So for example, here I have lice on a comb, which is the example I used in here. So if someone has lice and then they use the comb to brush their hair, and then someone who does not have lice comes and takes the comb and starts brushing their hair, then they get lice, and the comb would be an example of a fomite since it's inanimate and it's an object. Here we have foodborne. For example, if lettuce is contaminated with salmonella, then lettuce would be an example of a vehicle for salmonellosis. And we also have water as a possible vehicle. So as I was talking about in the very beginning of class, cholera would be an example of a waterborne disease. And finally, we have airborne, which means that it's spread through air. And a necessary distinction to make would be that airborne is not the same as droplet spread that I talked about earlier. Airborne would be through long distances, and it's very small particles. Like it's almost like it's very, very small, and they can survive for a long time in the air. So it can be up to lots of feet, lots of meters, etc. And just by breathing it, it's possible that you'll get the disease. And that's why measles is so infectious, because a lot of the times just by breathing in measles infected air, you can get the measles since it's spread through airborne. But this is not the case for diseases like COVID-19 and influenza, although COVID-19 is starting to show some like signs of airborne transmission. Hopefully that does not happen. But basically that's why measles is a very, very important disease to get make sure it's not there in the population, because it's very possible to spread very, very far. So yeah. All right, if anyone has any questions, please ask in the Q&A. COVID is not airborne. No, it's not airborne, but it's possible that it does diverge into airborne. Basically, we're not sure yet since COVID is so new, but yeah, it's generally regarded as droplet spread. Wait, what grade is this class for? Oh, well, it's like basically for anyone. There's not like a certain grade. If you're enjoying the content that I'm talking about, then feel free to recommend to anyone. And also, yeah. Is there mind-borne? I do not believe so. Can COVID-19 be spread by mosquitoes? I don't think so. What distinguishes a vehicle and a vector? That's a really good question. So a vehicle is something that's non-living. For example, food or water or air, that's a possible vehicle. Or a fomite can be a vehicle, they're non-living. But a vector is living. So for example, mosquitoes, flies, ticks, etc. That is a vector. That's a very good question. Thank you for asking. Let me check if there are any other questions. Which virus is the most easy to catch? I have no idea, but probably the common cold, since it's so common. Does being airborne also count as being vehicle-borne? Yes, because air is a, oh wait, no, I'm so sorry. Air is not, no, airborne and vehicle-borne are different. Oh my bad. Airborne is not vehicle-borne. Yeah, my bad. Can I make a virus? No. Okay, I don't know what kind of question that is. All right, we're gonna move on if no one has any other questions. Okay. Hope you guys are enjoying this class so far. Yeah, we have two different types of disease transmission. However, I do want to make a distinction between everything we talked about earlier and this type of disease transmission. So this is just a completely separate category of grouping diseases. It doesn't have anything to do with the stuff I talked about earlier, for example, vehicle-borne, vector-borne, stuff like that. So the first type of new disease transmission that we're going to talk about is horizontal transmission. Basically, think about horizontal versus vertical as generations. So you and I, we are in the same generation. We can spread the disease to each other. It's like basically horizontally, we are spreading like the disease to each other. Basically, it would be any of the things I talked about earlier. But on the other hand, we also have vertical. Oh my God, I'm so sorry. I messed up this PowerPoint. Horizontal transmit, the first one should be vertical and then the second one should be horizontal, my bad. So the first one, vertical transmission, mother to child. Horizontal transmission, basically everything else. So vertical transmission would be, for example, through breastfeeding or through birth, the mother transmits it to the child. But on the other hand, horizontal transmission is basically everything else. Sorry, I did spread this thing wrong. I'll change it and just try not to get confused. If you have any questions or you're confused, just let me know. Okay. Someone asked me but the common cold is caused by rhinovirus and alpha coronavirus. It's not the same virus, I know. So, but the most common cause of the cold would be rhinovirus. The reason why the cold is so common is because there's so many strains and so many like actually different viruses that cause it. That's why it's common. But the most common kind of common cold virus would be the rhinovirus. There's also different types. There's like adenovirus as well. And there's the other types of viruses that cause the common cold. Okay. Does anyone have any questions about, sorry about this being confusing. I'll try to change it, but I don't know if I can change it here. Oh wait, I can, sorry. Let me just change it real quick. This would be vertical. And this would be horizontal. Oops, my bad. Oh, there we go. All right, let's move on if no one has any questions. We're gonna go on to the chain of infection and we're pretty good on timing, so that's good. So I think the chain of infection will just be something that I will discuss with an example since we already covered a lot of it. So you always start with the agent, which over here is the germs thing. Sorry, here, it says germs. That's called the infectious agent. Basically, it's the thing that causes the disease. We talked about this in the epidemiological triad, same agent, same concept. Next, we have the reservoir, which is basically where the agent lives and proliferates. It's similar to the environment in the epidemiological triad. So for example, it can be within someone's lungs, it can be in soil, in wild animals, etc. I'm just gonna give you an example of this with COVID-19. So the agent for COVID-19 would be SARS-CoV-2 virus. The reservoir would be, it's not, okay. Thing is, COVID-19 is very controversial because we still don't know the exact reservoir. Some people say it's bad. Some people say it's like through like the lab or whatever. I'm not gonna go into all of this, but we're not sure where the reservoir is basically. And then we have the portal of exit, basically how it exits the reservoir. Through COVID-19, it's gonna be through respiratory tracts, basically. And then next we have mode of transmission. By the way, just follow the way the arrows are going, okay? We have mode of transmission, which is how germs get around, basically. And that was basically everything we talked about over here through the disease transmission. It can be vector-borne, vehicle-borne, airborne, droplet, direct contact. Basically, that's the different mode of transmission. And then we have the portal of entry, which is how the agent actually gets into the host. So for COVID-19, it would be through inhalation, basically. And next we have the susceptible host, which is the organism that can get the disease. So for COVID-19, that could be anyone who does not have the disease currently could get the disease, or has never had it before, they could get the disease. Could be the elderly more commonly, and then there can be like immunocompromised people, etc. Basically anyone who can get the disease. All right, does anyone have any questions about the chain of infection? Does anyone want me to go over a new example for the chain of infection? I will gladly do that. Just ask in the Q&A. How are viruses created? I'm actually not sure how the first virus is formed, but basically viruses, from one virus, another one is created by infecting the cell and causing the cell to do transcription and translation in their ribosomes and all that, and manufacture the viral genome, which is the DNA or the RNA, and also the viral protein coat. And then the viruses assemble themselves inside cells. And then come out and infect more. So that's basically how viruses are made, basically. Oh, look, Rich is here. All right. Anyway, just the last thing before we end is going to be, if you remember, I talked about how through this entire course, we're going to be going over an entire outbreak. So go ahead and read this introduction to our outbreak. And if you order my book, we're going to be doing the exact same thing, but it's going to be in more detail. So I suggest you get my book. Also, I'm going to open the chat now since you guys can talk now. Sorry, my computer's kind of lagging. All right, should work now. Okay, so go ahead and read this and make sure you understand what we're going to be dealing with for the rest of the course. Does anyone have any questions? Are there any bacteria in our bodies that can mutate into viruses? No. Bacteria are living. They have their own cellular manufacturing machinery. For example, they have ribosomes. They have like a cell membrane, cell wall, etc. So bacteria cannot become viruses, basically. They're two completely separate organisms, even though viruses are not exactly like living. So yeah. Also, just a quick plug again, I think you guys should buy my book. It's not that expensive, actually. The ebook is $4, and all proceeds are going to COVID-19 support COVID-19. So go ahead and buy that. And just another plug, I got it's been endorsed by 3 public health professionals and professors. So don't worry, I'm not spewing false information at you with my book. So yeah. Check out the link that I sent earlier. If you need me to send it again, I'll send it again. And I suggest, oh, by the way, Q&A, if you guys have any questions, go ahead and ask me. Are we going to be talking about cells in future classes? Well, that's going to be covered in my biology class, which is happening in 1 minute. So if you would want to learn about cells, we're talking about that today, actually. So yeah, I'm going to give you guys a 5-minute break for those of you guys who are actually also attending my biology class. Yeah. Oh, the link, okay, please don't spam the chat right now. I'm going to send the link. Sorry, my computer's kind of lagging, so it might take a while. Okay, please don't spam the chat right now, okay? Okay, I sent the link. No one spam. If anyone spams, okay, thank you for not spamming. Or that works too. Whatever Bella sent. Thank you guys so much for buying my book if you're gonna buy it. Really love the support. How old am I? I'm 16. Which disease is the most prevalent in the United States? I believe it's cardiovascular disease, like a wide variety of cardiovascular disease. my God, sorry. One more quick thing. Rich just reminded me that basically for Kid Teach Kid, if you have any questions, you just need to go to the website, and then there are ways for you to submit your questions. Just go to kidteachkid.org, and then on the drop-down menu for classes, there's camp class resources, and then there's student question submissions. You should be able to find them. If you have any questions, go ahead and just ask in there, basically. And for those of you guys who are just now coming for biology, we're going to be starting in, I'd say, around 5 minutes, just so those people who just took my public health class can like get a little break, and then we'll keep going. Yeah, and Rich just sent the links into the chat. And also, wait, are you guys able to, did you guys find the book link and the different links for class questions? All right, so I opened the chat again, but please don't spam. Yeah. Okay, someone's asking me, do you think, wait, okay, do you know if, no, I'm not gonna answer that. Are Q&A questions anonymous? You can make them anonymous if you want. There's an option to do so, but if you don't choose to do that, then they're not. How long did you take to write the book? I took around like 1.5 months, basically. Do you think resolving the corn subsidy will resolve the obesity pandemic? These are great questions, but I'm not an expert on that. I'm sorry. What SciOly events have I done? Okay. I think in the future, me and my co-captains are going to be giving a talk on SciOly. But since we're just chatting now, basically, the events that I'm doing, since I'm in high school, I do anatomy and physiology, disease detectives, and protein modeling. Those are my events. Let me see if there's other questions. What major are you planning on going into? I'm not sure yet. I'm like still like chilling in high school, so. All right, and if you guys have any issues with like buying the book or anything, just please let me know. Just you can email us through the Flash Math class questions, and then we'll try to get back to you as soon as possible. We'll wait 1 more minute, and then we'll start with. Okay, let me find the. And then we'll move on to biology.